All right, there we go. Hopefully, we didn't have me swearing over a technical glitch at the beginning of this. Presentation. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here on Zoom and on and online. Hold on, I'm just going to make an amendment. If you'll just let me change a setting here. All right, Jason. I'm going to make you co-host on this, if I may, just so that because I'm getting a lot of notices to enter the room.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, here, let me co-host. All right. And let's turn off the waiting room, I guess. And then maybe, all right, there we go. And now we can get started. All right. Hold on. Let's get this into gallery view. Welcome, everybody. It's to here on Zoom, and welcome to those of you who are joining us on YouTube. My name is Joseph Cohen. I'm a professor in the sociology department here at Queens College in the City University of New York, and I'm joined by my colleague Jason Tuga in the English department.
Hi,
Jason.
I'm Jason Tuga, and like Joe said, I'm in the English department.
And our colleague Anthony Borelli. Anthony, always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you for having me. I'm Anthony. I'm a Queens Podcast Lab student intern, and here to help.
And we have some other members on the Zoom. Jorge, Tracy, Oscar, if you ever want to chime in, just go ahead and interrupt me, but I'm going to get started on the presentation. It's great to see all of you again. All right, let me just make sure that I am all right. So let's get started with today's presentation. All right. So today we are talking about developing content creation franchises, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But before I begin, a few announcements. First off, we have moved our email list to Substack. And if you would like to join us for the Zooms and keep up to date on our programming, our new content, or anything else that we're doing here at the Queens Podcast Lab, go visit queenspodcastlab.substack.com and join our mailing list. We'd love to be able to keep you up to date on all that we do. Also, join us next Friday, when we will sit down for a conversation with our very own Jason Tuga on storytelling. A lot of what we do in content creation is storytelling. Jason is a recognized expert on the topic, and I'm hoping to talk about what goes into telling stories, what differentiates a good storyteller from a bad one, talk about your creative process as a pro. Jason, Jason's launched a new course here at Queens College on writing for podcasts. And some of what, I mean, I got to tell you, Jason, the stuff that I've heard from your students is really awesome. Like, it's really cool.
I'm amazed by what amazing. Well, I'm amazed. I shouldn't say I'm amazed. That's not good storytelling. I am very thrilled to see what cool stories they have come up with, and it's nonfiction, so the stories are all about the people, and they've found amazing people doing amazing things, and it's really exciting to see.
That's totally awesome. And you know, it's one of the real pleasures of this project is coming into contact with humanities scholars like yourself and learning from all you guys know. So I'm looking forward to sitting down. If you'd like to, if you're not already on our mailing list, you can join us by signing up or on our Substack email list, or you can RSVP to me, joseph.cohen@qc.cuny.edu. We have all sorts of programming coming up this fall after Jason. We're going to have a short seminar on hosting podcasts, orchestrating the recording session, doing show preparation, working with guests. On October 27th, we're going to have our project's first academic presentation. It's a discussion of fame. How do you get it? How do people use it? And how do people maintain it? It's part of some work that I'm doing with my colleague, Ryan Sperry. And then we're bringing in a bunch of outside experts on different topics that might be of interest to you. Digital publishing and the writing business. We're bringing in an expert on creativity, the law, producing video games. And we're planning more programming. So stay tuned to what we're up to. Now, today, what we're going to talk about is developing a content creation franchise. And I have two types of audiences in mind for this talk. Sometimes I meet people who they want to create, they want to use new media platforms, but they got no idea how to get started. They just know that they want to try creating, but they're just completely paralyzed by by not knowing all of the details that need to be tackled, how to get going. And so for some of you, if that's one of you, this is a seminar that addresses those interests. And then once in a while, I've consulted with people who they've started a content creation franchise and they've done 1, 2, 3 episodes, and then they just run out. They're like, I don't know what else to do. And often what happens is they've been thinking of that one YouTube video or that one podcast that they've intended to make. Like when they imagined being a YouTuber, they thought about that one video over and over again. And so their first crack is something really well worked out. And they have a couple side ideas. But in my experience, successful content creators develop a system. They develop a work system, almost like an organization, even if it's a one-person organization. They make decisions and they set up work routines. And we're going to talk about those decisions and those work routines and creating a system of content creation where you're able to understand that you have an audience and look to what your audience is interested in to give you ideas and develop a dialogue, so that you're not just speaking to who knows who on the one idea you had, but you're building a relationship with the community. I'll explain more as we go on. Just for some background, where does this advice come from? Well, what I'm going to present to you today is something that has been developed by a research project that I'm running. It's a mixed methods research project on content creation entrepreneurship. And what we do is we run podcasts and we experiment with running them and training people and getting people to run podcasts for us. That's a field experiment component. And we've interviewed successful podcasters. What we've done is we go on the iTunes subgenre charts and we sample randomly selected members. And if they've had at least 100 episodes and 100 iTunes ratings, we feel that's a reasonably well-developed enterprise. And we talk to them. We ask them, how did you do this? How did you get here? How do you do your work? And then there's been some consulting experiences which have more informed the problems that people run into. So that's where this advice is coming from. And the advice for people, or sort of the information that I find is most helpful to people who don't know how to get started, or people who are in a rut and don't know how to get things going and keep them going. I'm going to talk about sort of 5 things that you should think about on the way to developing your podcast or a digital content creation franchise. Could be a YouTube channel, could be an Instagram account, could be a Reddit handle, could be a TikTok account. Whatever you are looking for, a lot of these general principles apply. Now, the first thing I want to do is talk about what am I talking about when I'm talking about a content creation franchise, just so we're all on the same page. So a content creation franchise starts with a branded entity at its center. A content creation franchise might be most famously associated with a YouTube account, might be most famously associated with the podcast account. But really what it is there's a core identity or a brand. It can be a person, it can be a show, it can be a character, it can be an organization. And that organization creates digital content, videos, images, audio, or text, and it transmits them over a media portfolio. And those people plug in to the many lines of communication that the franchise, that central identity, puts out. And they basically plug their informational diet, their cultural diet into the franchise. And the reason I call it a franchise is because there's like a core concept or a core idea. So in this graph, this is the podcast, our flagship podcast of the Queen's Podcast Lab, the Annex Sociology podcast. We have the franchise, and it's a show, and it's recognized as a podcast show. But not all of our audience even listens to the show. Some of them interact with us on social media, and they talk about the stuff we talk about. Some of them interact on our website and will visit once in a while. They don't listen to us regularly, but they like to visit us and mine us for resources. And we're trying to develop now an email list. And so people will tap into an informational universe that you're constructing, and they might do it through your principal channel. They might do it through one of your auxiliary channels, or they might tap into multiple channels. But the point is that a content franchise sends out information through all sorts of channels, and people plug into them and grant you a piece of their attention, a piece of their media diet. And the more people who plug into one of your channels, the larger your platform, the larger the universe of people who are basically allowing you to help them construct their informational universe or their worldview. So that's what a content franchise is. I just want to give you a couple examples of other content franchises. Anybody ever heard of Mr. Beast? This is a YouTuber. His shtick is sort of like a Yiddish word for like his standard routine that he uses to entertain or create content, is that he gives away money. He's a rich guy who supposedly gives away money. And he is known for his YouTube videos, but the guy has a podcast. He has tons of social media feeds. He goes on live stream and interacts with fans on Twitch or YouTube Live. He also has a huge merchandising operation where he sells clothing and gifts and novelties, and even has a fast food delivery where I think he works with DoorDash and will co-brand a burger that the local diner sends you. And they'll put like a sticker on it or something like that. And then he's also a content creation advisor, and he develops smaller accounts, and I suppose he makes some type of financial gain. So there's a guy at the center, Mr. Beast, and he's putting out all sorts of content on all sorts of different channels. He's not really a YouTuber. He's a franchise. He exists on many corners of the internet. I had in our project, we spoke with a podcaster who was specializing in theme park news and information related to a particular theme park. They had a podcast, they had social media feeds. They also had a book that helped tourists visit the theme park, and they ran a travel agency. So the podcast told people about the book, and the book told people about the travel agency, and the podcast told people about the travel agency. And when people would visit the travel agency, they'd be like, well, look at our podcast to plan your vacation. And they created an informational universe that people could jump into. So it wasn't just about the podcast. They were doing all sorts of things. They had a business portfolio. Content franchises can be built around people, organizations, social movements, and a lot else. And you might think it's kind of schlocky to think of yourself as a content creation enterprise. You're like, I'm just a person. But like, that's how academics do their jobs. That's how people in marketing do their jobs. Like, that's how communications oriented enterprises run. Like as an academic has their brand, it's their personal name, and they put out books and they do speaking engagements and they develop relationships with the press and they have consulting gigs and they do lectures and classes. It's the same thing. It's the same thing, except you might be constructing an identity that is separate from your work status as a professor or as a student. Is there any questions or comments that anybody'd like to talk about content franchises, just what they are and what we're talking about developing when we're talking about developing a content franchise? If there's not, then I'll move on to the second item to think about. And that is thinking about why you're creating. So before you even get started thinking about what type of YouTube channel am I going to have, what type of podcast am I going to run, I think it is important for you to stop and ask yourself, why am I even getting into this? Maybe we could take why do people create in your view? Would anybody like to opine on that, or shall we just jump in?
Personally, I think people have a passion to create because they might have an idea, and with how we've sort of grown into this day and age where so many people have just posted their ideas, be it like people posting art on Twitter or just minor clips on TikTok, it shows that everyone has a desire to sort of put out something that something that they express themselves through, and they want to see how other people respond to it, see if there's a shared opinion or shared thoughts, likewise.
So it's like a love of expression and a desire to reach out to other people.
Yes.
And to see how other people react to, humans are expressive creatures,
Very much so.
I love it. I agree completely. Tamar says to fill a gap. Tamar, what do you mean? Do you want to expound on it either in the chat window or verbally?
Absolutely. So, our ever-changing world, there are new needs. And so a new need might pop up that you see no one else is filling, and then you're wanting to fill it.
Like a need for information, or a need to talk or hear talk about something, or a need to learn or flesh out an issue. I love it.
Absolutely, Professor Cohen. Thank you.
I agree 1,000%. So I'll say this. When I got into researching podcasting, I had an assumption that there were two fundamental motives that people got into creation, and that's money and attention. And I got into this project as a creator. I had some modest success as a podcaster before I started researching this, and that's what I assumed of myself even. Wasn't I podcasting to help my career when we boiled down to it? Wasn't I trying to do this to impress the CUNY bigwigs or have something interesting when I wanted a promotion? Wasn't I enjoying people listening to what I talk about? And did I receive any, satisfaction from that? I'd be lying if I said no. But don't overestimate the value of money or attention, how easy it is to get either, and how much you'll value it once you get any of it. And this is not just a personal experience, but it's something that has borne out when I've spoken to successful creators. Now, on the money front, my research suggests that even a pretty successful creator does not eke out a lot of money on the content itself. I can tell you somebody who got a book royalty check that just about bought me a sandwich at Yankee Stadium the other week. Like, creating, it can result in a windfall if you're like the LeBron James of content creation, right? If you're the Tom Hanks of blogging, maybe. But for even very good creators, I find most of them have day jobs, or they incorporate content creation into their jobs, or they run businesses where the content creation sort of acts as a marketing arm of their job, or they don't care about money really. And as far as attention, when I talk to people who are reasonably successful, my sense is that the reward of fame fades quite quickly. And when I talk to research subjects about fame, most of them are like graceful about it, and they acknowledge that it's flattering as long as it isn't intrusive or threatening. But it's not like, I don't see, my sense from my respondents isn't that they're like living for this attention. It almost becomes a mild sort of inconvenience. When you dig down, you find that people have a lot of reasons for creating. One very important one is just a passion or a topic for what they're creating about. Like I'll give you an example. Ryan and I interviewed a respondent who did a comic book related podcast. And this guy had every bit of fanaticism about comics as like a regular professor does about their corner of math, right? Or like 6th century Greek literature. Like they're just like us in a lot of ways. They have a burning passion for something, but it doesn't neatly fit into sort of the institutionalized system of the academy. But like when I've spoken to sports podcasters or comic podcasters, they sound like professors. They're very well versed in their fields. They're very passionate. They're very knowledgeable, you know? And so a passion will sustain, like that's a great reason to do it. Some people, they incorporate creation into their work and they create because it helps them do their job. That happens very often. Some people run a business, I said. A lot of people, though, they create to establish status or connection in a community that they had an a priori attachment to. What I mean is that, like if I said to you, if you said to me, Joe, I want to make a popular podcast, what would you recommend would make me popular? I'd say, well, anti-vax would probably be a good way to get famous. Selling out, you know, like if I did an anti-Semitic podcast as a Jew, I'm sure I could get a lot. I mean, right? People would love that. I could spread hate. That always is an easy sale. But you're like, well, that's not what I mean. And therein lies the point. You don't actually care about raw popularity that much, right? You don't want to talk about Bieber, Justin Bieber all day, even though that would probably get you the clicks, right? So none of you, even those of you who think that you're in for popularity, you have limits. And those limits show that it's not actually about popularity. Studies show that a lot of creators, and a lot of people in general, when they think about impressing people, they often have a reference group. Like your general popularity is a vehicle for impressing your friends and your kids. It's a vehicle for impressing your colleagues. It's a vehicle for impressing the people at church who you care about, whatever. So often we create to impress a particular group. And if that's the case, then create for that group. Just go right for the jugular. Go right to reach out to the people who you want to engage because they're the ones you care about. There are other motives that I've seen. You know, people they want to do community service. That's what I got from Tamar. There's a need out there and they wanted to fulfill it. Oscar, just the pure pleasure of creativity, expression, and performance. Absolutely. You know, people who get into content creation are expressive types. They like telling stories at parties, you know, they like telling anecdotes. They like writing stuff and sharing it, right? Like writing long, funny letters that everybody reads on social media. It's just a source of enjoyment in and of itself. My recommendation here is that you think about why you're doing this and keep your motives in mind when you're developing your franchise. Why? There's a very important reason. And it's that understanding your motives helps guide you towards developing a content creation enterprise that is personally rewarding to you. And it is my belief, or it's what I infer from my research, is that ultimately buy-in from the creator is the determinant of whether an enterprise lives or dies. What do I mean by that? 30 years ago, money would kill a magazine. A magazine would die because it runs out of money. You couldn't print it, right? A TV show would get canceled. and the money would run out. You needed money to engage in mass communications. And often what made a mass communications enterprise non-viable is that they didn't have enough money to sustain that mass communications. Technology has changed to the point now where it's virtually free to run a mass medium, to run a mass communications enterprise. And so a lot of successful people who I've interviewed, they don't even care about money. Some very well-known podcasts probably run operational losses, but the entrepreneur doesn't care because they love doing it for some reason. So one way to ensure that your enterprise will survive is to tap into what you want personally and try to find a way to create an enterprise, a franchise that is giving you what you're really seeking, so that you want to invest in it, so you want to keep up with it, because that will keep you on board. And keeping you on board to run your franchise is the factor that I believe, separates a successful from an unsuccessful one. I don't think it matters if you don't have any listeners, as long as you're rewarded by the experience of doing it in some way and you keep on doing it. Are there any comments or questions on this point? Why we podcast and thinking about your motives?
Well, I guess I would just make a comment about the annex, because I think it's a really good model for this. The annex is a podcast focused on major research in sociology. It seems to me that it tends to focus on you tend to invite guests who are doing work that has a relatively broad appeal, because it's about stuff that matters to people in the real world.
Yeah.
Right. And so and these are people who've written books, done research, and the podcast plays a very particular role, which is it translates that research into another medium that creates a different kind of engagement. Mm-hmm. And so you have like a ready audience for this: sociology students, sociology professionals, right?
Yeah.
And that I think a lot of people, including me, have ideas where the audience is not so well defined, but I do think that starting with audience is important.
We're going to get to that in a second, audiences.
Okay.
But I will say, like, if you ask me why I really like doing it, one is I get to meet people who do what I do and share my love of sociology. So even like, I just like meeting people, and I get to see them at conferences, and I almost feel like I made friends in my line of work. Mm-hmm. So just on a very personal level, apart from the fact that it's related to my job, it's rewarding. And I personally get excited to meet the people who wrote the stuff that I like reading. Mm-hmm. And now they'll talk to me. So it's almost a privilege for me. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the other cool thing is it's just become part of my job. I've just made it part of my job. And I like doing this. So it's like the main reason the annex has survived is just because I personally just get so much out of doing it. And it used to be a more popular podcast. Its audience collapsed for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about at some point. But like, it didn't even matter because I still enjoyed making it. Mm-hmm. And then I was able to recover because I still like doing it.
Well, that's another thing I think that's important, which is that you might be in a moment where your audience is not as big as it was, but that doesn't mean those episodes won't get a huge audience in 6 months.
Yeah.
Because they'll still be there,
Yeah. I have a model where it relies on organic searches. People can look at stuff after the fact. Mm-hmm. But let's talk about that point that you made, Jason, about audience, because I think that's a really important one too. Let's talk about that for a second. So once you have a sense of what you're looking for in creating an enterprise, the next step is to develop a show concept. A show concept is like a rich description of what your show is about, like what it sounds like, what it talks about, who listens, what makes it special. In fact, I think I made a list here, or I gave you an idea, right? It's not that you answer all of these questions, although it can help. It's that you know these things, like you have a solid vision in your mind of how the show actually sounds and what types of things it'll talk about. And to do that, my recommendation is that you think of 4 things: your focal audience, the building blocks at your disposal, and your media portfolio. And then you try to tie it all together in that descriptive final package, the polished concept. I want to talk about each of these in turn, but interrupt me if you have something to add, Jason, or anybody. The first thing to think about is, who is my focal audience? Who am I making the show for? In marketing parlance, we talk about it as your target market, right? And people might think of, so the reason that you want to have your audience in mind is, first, it will help you develop a product that is sensitive to what that group wants and is interested in. But more importantly, for everybody who started 3 podcasts and petered out and ran out of show ideas, when you know who you're talking to, it's very easy to come up with ideas. Just see what they're talking about online, or when you're reading a newspaper, you'll come across stories and you'll be like, oh, this is an issue that the community I serve is routinely thinking about. I will tell you, almost all successful podcasters that I've come into contact with, they've all had a very strong sense of who they're talking to. They have to talk about the community, my fans, my audience. It's their focal audience. Tamar asks, is it possible to share your notes with us after the live stream? Absolutely, Tamar. You bet. My recommendation, though, often when we think of audiences, we think of people's geographic, characteristics, or their demographic characteristics, or their group memberships. So you're like, oh, I'm going to do a podcast for 18 to 34-year-old, male consumers who like sports. I mean, I don't feel that is helpful to someone like me. What I always ask people to contemplate is, who's interested in what you're interested in this enterprise? Think of your audience in terms of shared interests, right? Who likes what you like talking about? Who reads the books you like reading? Who wants to hear the questions that you want answered? And the idea behind it is, rather than changing yourself to fit what you feel the market would like, which is a very old conception of media, right? That made sense when everybody was choosing from 5 different TV channels. But now the content creation market is fragmented into a million little pieces. And your best shot, in my opinion, is to find an audience. It's now possible for audiences who share your interest to find you. So put out what you really care about, what you're really interested in, and find the people who like what you like. That's my advice to you. In addition, and we'll talk about this in a moment, try to find an audience who would appreciate the strengths that you bring to the table in creation. I'll explain that in a moment. And then finally, ask yourself, do I care about this audience? And try to speak to people who you care about. Because if you move an audience that you care about, then the experience of creation is meaningful. The feedback you get is meaningful. Like if I said, listen, I could make you the #1 podcaster among 3 to 5-year-olds, unless you're interested in what 3 to 5-year-olds think of you, the experience won't be meaningful, right? You want to create for people who you care about. When you are able to identify who you're interested in, and it's a sleuthing exercise, it's a discovery exercise. When you find out who you want to speak with, well, then you get all sorts of ideas. Obviously, topics to discuss, guests or collaborators to bring on, but also things like format, right? I came to learn over the course of doing my podcast that people listened to us while they were commuting, or while they were on the treadmill, which makes a 30-minute show good. We used to have 1.5-hour shows with multiple topics. And eventually we tried to get it down to 30, 45-minute shows with segments. We're not always successful keeping it that short. But we moved from a variety show to a show with thematic individual episodes because we realized that's what our audience wants. That makes sense, given how our audience consumes us. They look us up on YouTube, they look us up on Google, whatever. It gives you an idea of product features. What I mean is, small creative decisions in your franchise. It will give you an idea of how to appeal to them, right? Like what type of music to have. Should I have sound effects? Should I have a peppy, FM morning radio, or should I have a chilled out NPR vibe that's really authentic? There's so many minor creative decisions that you can make, and they're easier to make when you know who you're talking to.
Joe,
Yeah.
Would it make sense to show something from the NPR podcast startup guide, or is that not?
Definitely.
Okay. So let me share screen for a second.
Yeah, you bet. Hold on. Let me make you co-host. Oh, I did.
Yeah, I think I am.
All right, go.
Okay, so here we go. So first of all, it's only sharing that one. Hang on, I want to open both. Do you see the cover right now?
Yeah, I see a concentric circles that looks like an alcohol-related enterprise.
Okay, so hang on. So this is, first of all, do you see the cover now?
No, now I don't see anything.
Okay, this is the book. This is Glenn Weldon from NPR's show. One of their shows, it's about pop culture. He wrote this book called NPR's Podcast Startup Guide. So I think annoyingly I have to stop sharing to show the other thing.
Jason has been raving. It's a good book, you say?
It's a good book, yes. And he's got a couple of things that I think are really helpful in terms of thinking about this. And one is this diagram where he asks you to think about your core audience and then more peripheral audiences. So this one is like, it's about a craft beer podcast. So he starts with like home brewers, craft beer drinkers, and pub crawlers. And then you can just see the audience gets more general as it goes out. And I think it's a helpful exercise to do. I put it in the chat. The other thing, there's something in the book that I think is pretty helpful, which is that he's got this exercise that he calls "Where does your audience hang out?"
Yeah.
And it's a series of questions of like, where do they live? What websites do they read? What social media do they use, et cetera, et cetera. And just like what length are they going to want? Being able to answer those questions, I think, will help a lot in crafting how you, both the topic itself and how you present it.
I like that too, because he's zeroed in on a very specific group. Or like, let's say if you're a craft brewer, you don't want to make a show for everybody.
Right.
You want to talk to craft brewers. And then there are groups that have a lot in common with craft brewers that might also be interested, that are in the concentric circles.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to key in on an audience. You should know who you're talking to. And almost all of the successful podcasters that I've interviewed have an extremely clear idea, and they're very sensitive to who their audience is. They even make sure to interact with their audience, a lot of them, in a regular basis, just to keep that, that link alive, to keep that familiarity going. It's very, very important on Web 2.0 media.
Yeah, on the podcast Ologies, that podcast?
No, I don't know that one.
Ali Ward. It's a science podcast. She interviews people. She calls them ologists. So anybody she can like attach that to, she interviews. So it could be anything from like dolphins to like racism, right? And anyway, she makes money through a Patreon account, like a lot of podcasters. but she asked, she really solicits feedback from the audience on Patreon, and then she reads a few of their comments on every episode. So it makes the audience feel like they're part of the enterprise, you know?
And she's also creating a powerful social reward for her financial supporters. It strikes me we should definitely do a session on monetization. We've developed a whole scheme on what we've observed. I'll save it for another thing. All right, moving on. That was awesome. So understanding who you're talking to is important, but there's also the question of what do you bring to the table? Creators often lean on skills or resources that allow them to develop distinctive content. Like, all of us have special abilities. We're good at something. In business strategy, they'd say, what are your core competencies? Are you a good performer? Are you an expert in something? Are you funny? Do you have access to archival materials that no one else can use? Are you part of groups, or do you have access to certain collaborators or guests, famous people? Figure out where your special abilities lie. And if you can find a way to take what you're especially good at and make it a feature that distinguishes your content enterprise, that can be very helpful to you, and it can make it more rewarding, because it's people love to engage in operations that play to their strengths, right? We all love doing stuff we're really good at. It makes it more pleasurable, and it gives us a better chance of making something high quality. And that's worth contemplating. Like, so for example, I am not very strong in physical aesthetic things. I'm not a good dresser. All my clothes are from Costco. I can't really draw. I can't do graphic design. And so like podcasting's good. I mean, I don't have much hair. So podcasting is a good medium for me, right? I like conversation. I feel confident about my voice. I feel like I'm quick on my feet, and I like talking to people. So it would make sense that I'd be a podcaster. It would make sense that my podcast would be a conversation interview show, because that's what I'm good at. That's where I feel good. If we were doing an Instagram where I was going out in a swimsuit, I don't feel I would do very well in that. And so that's not going to be my enterprise. Even if, let's say, all the sociologists would love a swimsuit, a swimsuit Instagram feed, like, I'm not the one to deliver that, because I don't got it. And so take stock of what you can do, what resources you have that can make the content special. And then what you try to do, well, hold on. And then what you try to do is you try to find a medium where your target audience is, and a medium that capitalizes on what you're good at, what you're skilled at, and you try to serve your audience there, assuming that they're on that medium. And you have a lot of media at your disposal. You have lots of choices for creating digital content. First of all, a web and blogging. People dismiss the importance or the value of a website. Like, I didn't realize this. Like, even my department's website, it gets like a couple hundred hits a day. Like, a couple hundred people every day go and look at that website. Now, imagine if we physically had 200 visitors walking into the department daily. That's a lot of people. 20 years ago, when I worked in a radio station in the 90s. 20 years ago, people didn't scoff at an audience of 500 or 1,000 people. That was considered a good audience. Nowadays, people are like, well, only 200,000. 200,000 would be like a national broadcast in Canada back in the day, right? So don't dismiss media like websites that can get you a couple hundred hits. That's a lot in reality. It's just people's sense of what's a lot is distorted.
Joe, can I interject something specifically for students? I would recommend podcasts you listen to, like big ones and ones that are making money. And so I would mention 99% Invisible is one. The one Ologies I mentioned before is another. Joe Rogan, Fresh Air, even though it's on the radio too. Pay close attention to the credits, because those bigger podcasts have teams and with many roles, and they're different for each one. But the obvious one is a producer, but there are researchers, there are sometimes designers, there are people doing all kinds of different things. If you've gained some experience with developing and producing content, like in college or wherever else you are, then you can be a candidate for those jobs. And if you're a person who's like, I'm not a host, that's just not me, there's a lot of other stuff you can do.
Yeah, that's awesome advice, actually. That's really awesome advice, because it's true. Not all of us get joy from being the performer, but there's still a joy in creating that can occur anywhere in the production process. That's so true. Like script writing. I mean, who wouldn't love to be a comedy writer, even if you never showed up on a thing? And instead, I'm at the university where I have a captive audience that's forced to listen to my jokes on the path to getting credit.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so the point that I'm making here is pick a medium. Pick a medium that relies on your strengths. If it's visual, if you have a strong aesthetic sense, for images, try Pinterest if it's a craft type of oriented thing. You try Instagram if it's static images. If you are a writer and you like writing short bits, there's a bunch of microblogging, like Facebook is a good medium. Twitter is a good medium for short clips. Longer reads, Medium, or a blog. You get the idea, though. There's a variety of platforms, email lists, ebooks, short videos, long form videos, images, short messaging, long reads, audio of all type. And don't just assume that you have to go on the same media that everybody's talking about. Might be that all the kids on earth are on TikTok, but if you're not into making 1-minute videos, then TikTok isn't the place for you, because TikTok's about making 1-minute videos, But if you're somebody who loves videos and doesn't want to do long stuff, man, TikTok might be just for you. So the medium has to match not only the audience, but also your competencies, what you're good at, your building blocks, your special building blocks. And then what you want to do is you want to take a sense of what you're good at, who your audience is, and what medium you want to work on, and you develop that rich description of your show. That elevator pitch, that way that you can just describe it in 30 seconds, that just makes it vivid. Now, that won't be your final, that won't forever describe your enterprise, but it's a working idea. So you have something firm to imagine that you can use when you're coming up with specific show ideas. Once you have an idea of the concept, my recommendation to students and learners is just go out and start doing it. Just go out and start doing it. Don't over plan. Don't think forever about it. Just start making stuff. And if you don't know if it's going to be good, don't announce what you're doing till you've had 4 or 5 episodes, till you've had 20 posts, till you you don't have to tell the world about it. Start it on the down low. Make sure you like it. And then once you feel good about it, tell other people. But once you get started, you're going to want to develop a structured production and promotion system. And really what this means is explicitly laying out the job that you do, all of the steps that are required to create a single episode. That way, once you make it concrete, it's easier to share. It's easier to find efficient ways to do it. It's easier to work on 3 episodes at once while you're doing the same operation. It's easier to train other people. There's a lot of reasons. And it's easier to improve because you're writing down what you're doing. You have a model. This is a process at the annex that was developed over time. Every annex episode is the culmination of these 6 steps. And over time, I've learned to do each of these in a way. Like because these steps have been made explicit, I've developed my own method that works for me to create the type of show. Like I can tell you how I do each of these steps. And for example, some of this I will talk about when we do hosting. I'll talk about how I do show preparation. I'll talk about how I come up with ideas for my show. But that might not be useful to what you do, right? I found my own way. But what is important is that you develop an explicit sense of your work process. Make a to-do list, right? Map it out. So what I do is I have methods for coming up with ideas, right? So I'll look on social media, or I'll read the journals, or I'll go on message boards, and I'll just look to see what people are talking about, or I'll just read sociology and be taken by a story. And then I go out and I look for people who have expertise on what I want. I'll ask openly on Twitter, or I'll do a web search, I'll do a lit review. Show preparation we'll talk about in a couple weeks, doing research, coming up with content in case, conversation gets slow. The recording session, post-production is editing the raw audio to make it sound good, and then web and social media postings. When you lay out what you do, one, you have a firmer grasp of what you're actually doing, and that allows you to research each step, develop new ideas for each step, sharpen the saw. If you don't know what you're doing, if you're doing anything chaotically, it will feel like a bigger job. It will be stressful. But when you break a big job up into small pieces, it becomes more doable, and people tend to stay engaged. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And then finally, truthfully, I think when you talk to old media people, they often talk as if there's a right and wrong way to do everything. And I think that that's a byproduct of legacy, how legacy media people think. I believe in our new media environment where there's a lot of micro outlets and small audience enterprises that run just fine. I think there aren't as many set rules as there used to be. And to figure out what is going to be good for you, you got to start creating. You got to start creating and make your organization run in a way that works for what you have in terms of ability and time and resources to create stuff that resonates with your audience. And everybody's got opinions. I give you my opinions, but they're not going to work for everybody. They might only work for me. You got to make the leap. But this is the point where people often stop. A lot of people stop. Once it starts to get real and they realize that at some point they're going to have to put their stuff out there, often students will pull back. They'll be like, whoa, what's happening here? So let me just end with some encouraging words. Number one, what happens is people are afraid of negative feedback. They're afraid of getting criticized or mocked, and it really can rob them of the opportunity to enjoy, creating and what we do. First, know that this anxiety that you feel is normal, and it will go away after you do it a couple times. Exposure to putting yourself out there makes it easier. It's almost like when you had to learn to ask people out on a date. When I was 13, I thought I would die. Once I got a little older, it wasn't as scary. I have found that when I have brought people to the point of putting stuff out, participants are often surprised that their work is positively received. And more importantly, participants are often happy themselves. Like, I find people get way more satisfaction out of looking at something they made and saying, that's good, I like it, as opposed to having other people tell them that they like it. There's no greater satisfaction than liking what you make. And that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And people will like it. People will like it. And I'll tell you, the students who we've worked with, Jason, I think you'll agree with me. It's great stuff. It might not be good for a 45-year-old, suburban dad, but I could see the appeal.
Mm-hmm.
If it appeals to you, why not someone else?
Mm-hmm.
Avoid magnifying negative feedback. Sometimes I think we've all had this experience on social media where you say something and like 50 people are like, yeah, man, or good job. And then one person makes this asshole comment and you're thinking about that guy the whole time, right? It's basically 50 positives and one negative is like a 98% satisfaction rate, but you're thinking about that 2%, right? Avoid that. Or I find, for me personally, I've learned to enjoy creating more, and I see a lot of other respondents. They learn to appreciate the positive feedback. Sometimes we're quick to dismiss positive things that are said about us because we're like, oh, give me the truth. Somebody's got to tell me the truth that I'm terrible, but no, if someone gives you positive feedback, that's good.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
I've often had the experience with graduate students who are putting their work out into the world, and they get somebody saying, wanting to pick a fight with them on social media.
Yeah.
And my advice is always do not respond to that person. Like, it's very tempting. They want to respond because they want to defend themselves.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere good. I mean, if you're the person who wants to make the podcast about like, I'm an anti-Semitic Jew, then yes, you want to engage in that. But if you're not that person, I would just steer clear.
Jason, I think something happened with your microphone.
Oh, it's because my cat is roaming around on my desk.
Anthony, I'm going to get to you in a second, but I want to say Invader 145 on YouTube has a really good question. What if you're your own critic? And I'd say to that, dude, take it easy on yourself. You don't, like, chances are when you made it, there was something redeeming. Like, you don't have to hate on yourself. The world's harsh enough. Negative critics are louder sometimes. That's totally true. And Anthony, did you have something to say on this?
Yeah, just make it. Whatever it is, there's always jokes, especially about podcasts, like, oh, you're just making a podcast about you and your friends, or like it's just you and your friends talk because you guys think you have such great banter. Okay, but like, to make a podcast, maybe it's not the hardest thing in the world, but you need the equipment, you need the time, and you need to actually know what you're talking about if you're going to talk about a subject. So if you think that you and your friends, or you and some colleagues, some other students, whoever you do this with, even if it's just yourself, if you think you're knowledgeable enough and it's something you're passionate about enough that you want to talk about it, then just make it. You don't have to put it out at first. You can just make a few episodes and practice, but as long as you're making it, you will get more comfortable. I've had to record many things over the years, and I used to hate how I sounded on audio, but now I'm very indifferent to it, especially when I have friends who tell me like, oh, you sounded great, or you sounded so professional when we record things, because I've practiced with them, or we'll do a little thing. And they're like, no, you sounded like the best out of all of us. And I'm like, well, no, I hate my voice. What are you talking about? Yeah. You have to realize that it doesn't matter what you think of yourself when you're doing it, as long as you're being actually, because everybody has those negative voices, as long as you're actually critical, like, okay, maybe I was saying and too much, that's okay. If you're like, oh no, I hate it, I hate what I sound like, I hate this, I hate that, like, that's not productive. You want positive feedback from yourself. You want constructive criticism, and you need to be able to criticize yourself in a healthy way.
That's very true. I agree with you 100%. I want to say we got Mike Mena here. He says, just start making stuff. That's pretty much my motto. Press record, right? That's Mike Mena. And then I agree with you, Anthony. In fact, this is what I would say on this is, remember, unconstructive negative feedback is often not about you, right? No matter who you are, there's a big group of people who don't like whatever they think you're part of. They don't like your profession. They don't like your taste. They don't like who you are. That's just life. But like, it's not about the creation. You can't help that. And I wouldn't take it. That being said, you should always strive to improve by learning what you do wrong, right? Take constructive feedback as a favor, because as you get better, you'll have the opportunity to reach more people. And finally, focus on communing with people who appreciate your interests and your work, right? The environment has changed. We no longer create stuff to appeal to all of America. We create for people with narrowly defined tastes and interests. And the key isn't finding a way to please everybody. The key is to finding people who like what you like and they like what you're about, and you develop a relationship with them. And you can find a lot of people like that on the internet now, just because it's a big world. You know, there's just like there's 10,000 people for just about every interest or taste. So you just got to find them. It's like somebody once told me about getting married and getting a job. You just have to find like one person to sucker in, and then you're good. It's sort of like that with pot. You just got to find a few people who like what you like, and they're out there for sure. So the 5 considerations before planning your podcast. That's what I had today. And is there, Jason, do you have any sort of closing thoughts or comments?
No, it just occurred to me based on what Mike was saying, like make something and then you can decide whether you want to share it with anybody or not. Right. And practice makes a huge difference. I mean, we saw the evolution of Mike's show last week.
Yeah.
Right. Like huge evolution, because as you go, you learn things and you start to basically what you want is for things that took conscious thought to become intuitive so that you're doing them naturally. But that's a process that only happens over time with practice.
First of all, Mike, you should be on these Zooms. We gotta hustle Mike to come join us on all these. He had a lot to say last week. I really loved hearing from. If you missed that session, we're going to be putting it up on YouTube. We're just sort of working the kinks out of our production system, so it'll all come up. Before we adjourn, and for those of you on the Zoom, we can stick around for a second after, just sort of a final word. These free educational resources are brought to you by the state and city of New York. These are your tax dollars at work. Our work creates free public resources, non-commercial scholarly media content, and educational experiences for young New Yorkers who aspire to careers in fields like marketing, media, communications, entertainment, and information, and content to help community members who want to become creators themselves. If you want to support the kind of work that we do, please visit our website, queenspodcastlab.org, and click donate. Your tax deductible donation to our project will go through the Department of Sociology at Queens College in the City University of New York. And not only does it help us create content and create learning opportunities and internship opportunities for students, but it communicates to our superiors that people like and value this stuff. So I'm going to end the live stream here. Thank you to all of you on YouTube who have joined us, and I hope to see you next week when we talk to Jason Tuga about the art of storytelling. Until then, thanks and stay in touch.